Smell is everything. I mean, a scent can make someone feel so many emotions. Nostalgia, pain, happiness, peace. I've always been fascinated with different scents. When I was a kid, my favorite scents were freshly cut grass and gasoline. Now, it's two very different kinds of smells. I'm sure you would agree with me. I also lived in a rural area, really liked the smell of fresh manure. It was synonymous with spring and summer being right around the corner. Even today, as some of my friends describe it, this awful stench is one of the most nostalgic scents to me. I've also always had a great nose. I was the first one at the dinner table because I was the first to smell the food cooking, after my mother, who was in the kitchen, of course. By age 15, I could tell when a perfume did or did not fit someone. And at 20, I could pick out the different ingredients in wine just by taking a small sniff. However, I spent so many years in college trying to figure out what I wanted to do in my life. I pissed away a ton of money as I studied psychology, sociology, and I went into all the basic programs you could think of, trying to find out what I wanted. I got crippling debts because nothing really interested me. Until one day, I found this job on Craigslist. Well, I thought it was a joke, but I still replied to it. And 10 years later, well, I could say that I have not once regretted my choice of following up on that ad. I became a professional armpit sniffer for a big deodorant company. Now, believe it or not, it's a real job title, and I'm being paid an impressive wage to do it. You see, my job consists of sitting in a hot, sweaty room with different candidates, men, women, and smell their armpit before and after the deodorant is applied. It's not an easy job, nor is it glorious, but it pays the bills, and then some. You have to have a special kind of stomach to smell nasty, hot, and moist armpits all day, mostly since the chosen candidates are chosen because they have intense body odors. And I mean intense. You should see some of the Sasquatches that roll in here, but I digress. As I said earlier, different, strange, and exotic aromas are my favorite things, even those scents that people consider the worst. You want to know a secret? Sometimes to wash my proverbial nose palate, I take a sniff of balsamic vinegar. Yeah, it readies me for the next person. But I won't say it's easy. The first few months I worked there, I got sick a few times, ended up dizzy after a few hours of work. But I never gave up and never really hated my job. It was fascinating to me that I could be paid just to sniff some armpits. I wasn't a lazy guy just looking for quick cash either. I could have found another job at any given time. But I liked working with my nose, even with this job's downsides. After 10 years, I can honestly say there's not a lot of smells that make my stomach churn. I still feel nostalgic about manure, gas, and freshly cut grass. But I rarely find smells that spur intense emotions in me anymore. I guess this is the biggest downside of my job after 10 years. There are just no smells unique enough to do that to me. The job just became as mundane as an office job. Which is why I need to tell you about her. Now, trust me when I tell you that I've just about smelled everything. Think of the worst BO you can imagine, and amplify that by 10, if not 20. I've smelled it, and probably even worse. Now I'm not someone that's easily disturbed. Some might say my job in itself is disturbing, but it's not. I'm the reason your armpits smell good, or don't smell in some cases. There's no useless labor, as they say. But that morning, when she came in, and I smelled her, well, it was the first time in 10 years that I nearly threw up on the job. Whoa, Fucking magnificent, I thought. Her armpit stank nearly blew me out of my chair. I couldn't even tell what I was smelling. I couldn't believe that a scent like that could be human. I've never smelled a decaying corpse, but the first thought that crossed my mind after smelling her pits was that she smelled like death. If dying has a smell, which I'm sure it must, it would be very similar to what I smelled on her. It's like she took 2 decaying hamsters and rubbed them in her pits that morning, poured some orange juice on it, called it a day. Hell, my supervisor had to get me out of that room for a solid 5 minutes so that I could get my senses back. Needless to say, I sniffed a lot of vinegar that day. It was so pungent. I could taste it. Like armpit peanut butter on the tongue. It simply wouldn't go away. Strangely enough, I asked if I could just, give it a little lick. She said sure, and I stuck my tongue out and rolled her pointed armpit hairs on the tip of my tongue. Now, mind you, that's not something that we usually do. It's obviously not in the code of conduct for armpit smellers, but it was something that I needed to do. And I minded the taste less than I minded the smell. It was, oddly salty. Like a good bag of chips, like salt and vinegar, perhaps. It was like your favorite late evening treat as you Netflix and chill with someone you like. The taste was almost comforting through that nauseating smell. And it's for that reason that I returned to the room and finished my job after the second time I had left it. The first day with her was hard, but I got through it all right. When she came back the next day for more testing, I was actually looking forward to working with her. As I brought my nose close to her pit, I braced myself. The smell was just as thick and aggressive as the day before, but I managed to retain my composure this time. I felt a little dizzy and I looked up at her. She was looking at me, wearing an oddly charming smile on her cupid bow lips. I started salivating and feeling my heartbeat increase, and suddenly, the heat in the room became my heat. I could feel fire rushing through my veins and in places, well, that I'm almost ashamed to admit. I stared at her brown, bouncy curls framing her face. Then I locked eyes with her. Her eyes were incredible. A shade of brown that was closer to orange, with little golden specks around the irises. I was fascinated by the way she was looking at me. Usually I don't make eye contact with the testers. It's just unprofessional. Hell, it's fucking weird. And it makes people uncomfortable. But her gaze was calling mine. It was like she wanted me to look at her. So I took my face out of her right armpit. And I did. I stared right into her face, and I told her, "You, my dear lady, fucking stink. And for some reason, I can't get enough of it." She smiled again. "Well, then, have another whiff." And so I did. No matter what deodorant we used on her, it didn't work. It did not even put a damper on her natural scent. I could still smell and taste it whenever she raised her arm, and I moved my nose closer to her pit even more. Now, by the third day, not only was I looking forward to working with her, but I felt like I needed to work with her. I had already grown accustomed to her scent, and would go as far as to say that its pungency made it even more unique to me. More attractive in a way. I mean, shit, dare I say intoxicating? Yeah. I guess that would be the right word. Like a freediver before going underwater, one large inhale after another. I was getting drunk on her stink. And once again, we tried every last deodorant we had on hand. And nothing worked. Even that stuff that we keep in the back room behind security glass. The super strong aluminum stuff mixed with baking soda. And at the end of the day, I knew that she would be told that her work here was over. You see, when a tester doesn't respond positively after 3 days of testing, their file becomes a medical case, and we recommend meeting with doctors. These are the cases beyond help. And those are pretty extreme cases and, well, reasonably rare. But I guess I should have known from the first whiff. I just couldn't let go, though. See, I kept quiet because I was intrigued, and now that it was time to let her go, well, I still wasn't ready to do that. Now, I don't know what came over me, but once the day was over and we both walked out, well, I only pretended to say goodbye. I got in my car and waited until I saw her pass in front of mine. Then, I followed her. Now, I know what you're thinking, that, I'm a disgusting little pig, a creepy stalker, someone who has no regard for a woman's privacy. And you know what? Well, that's probably right on the money. I am a disgusting little piggy. I sniff armpits for a living. But I'd never done something like that before, so I'm no creep. I just couldn't get her out of my head, not after going through something so intimate with her. Not after the way she kept looking at me while my nose was buried into her bushy, smelly, rotten pits. I just knew that I needed to follow her. No, we weren't done yet. I just knew that I needed to follow her. Now, she didn't live in Toledo, so I followed her on the Highway 280, trailing a few cars' length behind. She took exit 2 onto the 795, and at this point, I'm pretty sure she knew I was following her. I wasn't even trying to be subtle about it, or trying to put some distance in between us. You see, I don't think of myself as an action movie sort of guy, like a spy. I just needed to know more about her and her life. She lived on Genoa Road. Her closest neighbor was quite far away. It's pretty sparse out here. I saw her park her car in the driveway and lean against her car door. I pulled in and turned off my engine. She knew I was following her, and now she was inviting me inside. A wave of heat washed over my body as she beckoned me closer. She didn't even need to speak. See, her eyes told me everything. I salivated again, even before smelling her. I also couldn't tear my eyes off of her for some reason. Now, I'd like to say that she was a natural beauty, but she was pretty average by society standards. She had nice shiny hair, captivating eyes, and a great smile, but her features were very sharp, almost angular. She didn't have many curves, if you know what I mean. By my standards, hell, she wasn't even pretty. And I don't say that to be mean or, hell, even disrespectful. I'm just saying that she wasn't my type. And yet, I don't think I've ever wanted a person so bad in my entire life. As a professional body odor smeller, it's really tough finding someone attractive when all you could smell is their natural scent through masking by perfumes or cologne. It's really hard to be with someone who hasn't showered, and even harder to be with someone who doesn't have a great hygiene routine. You ever kiss somebody with a cavity? Well, you probably can't smell it, but I certainly can. Anyway, so I followed her inside, ready to absolutely devote myself to her. If she asked to step on me, I would have let her. Heels on and all at this point, I didn't give a shit. I was prepared to worship the ground she walked on if she wanted to. Part of me wanted nothing more than to be with her, to be hers. And wouldn't you know it, the feeling was mutual too. As soon as we were inside, she seductively gazed at me. I tried to go in for the armpit, but she stopped me before I could get there and led me to her basement. It was a dark, dank, and musty basement without any windows, and the old filament bulb dangling from the ceiling didn't offer much light as I stared at her. And I did not feel anything but sheer, undiluted lust for that woman, even as she strapped my arms to the bed frame, and I saw shimmering scales appearing on her lower belly as she undressed. And I couldn't believe what I was seeing. She wasn't a she was a thing. Some sort of otherworldly creature was transforming right in front of my eyes. She let out a strange, gurgled howl, and out of her mouth a long tendril-like tongue shot into my mouth, down into my throat. Oddly enough, she still retained her white teeth and rosy lips. She restrained my hands and took my control away, so I couldn't just throw myself at her armpits. I understood now. I understood everything. I wasn't afraid, but I wanted those damn pits badly. I needed that stench. I knew she would give me what I wanted in the end anyway. And that's why we were here. That's why she came to find me at my job. She needed someone who could survive her. She didn't smell of death. She was death. And I bet she's killed with that stench before. Her lips crashed into mine and all my thoughts vanished. She was so close that whenever I breathed, her scent filled my lungs and made me drool like a madman. She brushed my lips to wipe some of the drool off of them, and my vision was blurring. I was so intoxicated by her that my eyes were filling with tears. Happy tears. I finally felt like I achieved something, you know? Fuck college. Screw the armpit smeller awards. Birthday cake? Christmas? A new iPhone? Those had nothing on this creature, even though she was absolutely hideous. I blinked a few times, just enough to clear my vision. I saw a black and green tail shooting out from behind her as she knelt on top of me and angled herself. The blunt tip of the tail wrapped around my throat, and she leaned down, presenting her armpit to me. I could barely breathe because of her tail nearly strangling me to death, and her scent was so intense I felt my lungs could barely take it. The heat in the small room at work was nothing compared to the heat between us at that very moment. I parted my lips and lapped at her armpit, and I caved in. If I had any shred of decency left in my soul, it was gone that moment that I licked the pit. Now I could feel her tail tighten around my throat as my hips rocked forward, her moans only encouraging me to move faster. By this time, my tongue had cleaned off the sweat from her armpit entirely. My face and breath smelled of her too. I don't know how long it lasted, nor how many times we did the dirty. But I passed out eventually. When I came to, there were sores and bruises all over my body. Hell, I looked like a slice of marbled rye with butter. My throat felt dry, and I had a strange knot in the back of my mouth. I was still tied up in her basement, but I didn't mind. She came to me and she gave me a code red Mountain Dew and fed me a Whopper. I told her to pick off the onions, of course. Those things are nasty and I didn't want bad breath in case she wanted to, get it on again. The strange thing is we never really talked. We didn't need to. All she had to do was look at me, and I knew what she wanted. Her fingers moved through my hair. They were long, skeletal-like fingers, raking against my skull and making me shiver. We'd also lay there. I would little spoon, she was the big spoon. That way I could be near the pits, and I felt like I was right where I needed to be. Now a month passed like a day, but time didn't matter in the basement. I woke up one day and her tail was wrapped around me. There was just enough distance between both of us for the younglings. 4 of them, all bobbing their heads like little birds begging to be fed. They were interesting little creatures. Half human like me, half skeletal with little nub-like tails like her. And here I was, still tied up to the bed, her tail tightly wrapped around my lower half, our shared heat warming up our babies. Now they started really moving about a week later, and I'd lost all sensations in my arms by then. In fact, I probably lost it a while back. I didn't feel pain either, perhaps because of her scent, her lovely, intoxicating, amazingly unique scent. I knew what was expected of me. Every day, she gave me more and more time with her armpits. The more I licked, the less I felt. One of the babies started walking around using its tail like a crutch. She brushed my cheek with her hand. I couldn't feel anything. It was euphoric like a morphine drip. And I was elated because I knew what was going to happen to me. You see, I was chosen. I was chosen not only to give her children, but to help them live. It was the ultimate sacrifice. I was probably going to die so that they could live. I would be their food. They would nibble at my toes and make little teeth marks, not yet strong enough to penetrate the skin. And it would have been a magnificent death. However, my sister, Angie, whom I guess I failed to mention my family earlier, well, she'd been looking for me, even put out a missing persons report. The police had found my cars sitting in her driveway. They had even been to the house a couple of times, questioning her. But the last time, they brought a warrant, and she didn't open the door. A SWAT team was brought in, and they came down the stairs into the basement, and she ran and lunged at them. One of the officers blew her head off with a shotgun, the blood from her head popping open, covering my face in a spray of spectacular red, with chunks of brain matter dripping off of my nose. Our babies hobbled into the corner of the basement and slid under a small little hatch, evading the officers. And they were never found. I don't know what was beyond the hatch, but I suspect that it led into the fields behind the house. I was brought to a hospital. The lump at the back of my mouth opened up to reveal a pus sac containing some sort of mild paralytic and pain reliever. The doctors were confused, but hey, it's Ohio and, well, shit gets strange here, so they just kind of wrote it off. I'm guessing that tentacle tongue had more than one use other than pleasure, and those smelly armpits were alluring to me for some reason. Or at least, that's my 2 cents.